The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill today because this is just another one of the Democrat Party's political stunts. The 116th Congress continues now under this cloud of a partial government shutdown, and it is for one reason, and one reason only, and that is that the Democrats continue to put their political agenda ahead of the security of our country. So here we find ourselves. The very first acts of the new majority is to bring a Senate bill forward without any hearings, without any debate, and certainly without any amendments. As you know, Mr. Speaker, Democrats bring the bills to the floor this week are really bypassing the entire process, bypassing every member's responsibility here in Congress, and that is to put their mark on each and every bill. But it's also maybe to distract from some of the President's ideas as well. And in fact, the President's funding request is completely normal and it is necessary. It's not extreme, it's not divisive, it's not political in any way whatsoever. But what is extreme, what is divisive, what is political, and what is unnecessary is the Democrats' refusal to actually negotiate with the President. Their refusal to hear the facts and understand the facts as presented by the experts. They're more committed to satisfying their political base than securing the border and opening the government, which we could do very quickly if they just chose to meet with the President and negotiate on good terms and good faith. But if that's not bad enough, there are serious problems with this bill. The underlying measure itself is certainly not perfect. After all, it's a Senate bill, might I remind you, Mr. Speaker. It's identical to the bill that they passed last year, and it does not include any of the House priorities. And Democrats are not allowing any amendments, as you know here today. So there's no way to even improve this bill, to perfect this bill, and we know we are the body of perfecting the Senate's legislation. Our constituents have elected us each here to represent them in Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, but not to abdicate our responsibilities and simply accept something from the Senate. In fact, this today is beginning a process that I see as very dangerous, and in fact is just asking this body, under this new majority, to have every member of the House of Representatives to vote on nearly $300+ billion of spending without one committee hearing, without one bit of debate, without one amendment, and without any bit of perfection, and yet stand before our constituents and say we've given this full and thorough thought. Now, there are many House priorities which both Democrats and Republicans support that would certainly improve this legislation. For example, the bill that we passed last year out of the House had many great bipartisan elements to it. We passed it back in July, and it contained nearly $276 million for the Calexico, California land port of entry, fully funding what was necessary there at that land port of entry. Yet the Senate bill is $100 million short. Additionally, the bill that passed the House that we included last year included 20 pieces of legislation that were bipartisan financial reforms, which were approved by this chamber during the last Congress with a vote of 270 votes or more. Mr. Speaker, you don't find that very often, and you certainly haven't over the last couple of years, but yet it was included in what we passed last year, and might I add, it is completely omitted by the Senate. So Democrats and Republicans, including Chairwoman Waters herself, sponsored many of these provisions, and I know she's here with us today, and I hope she speaks to the fact of their absence in this bill today, that we were building upon the Jobs Act from 2012. These provisions facilitated capital formation, enhanced our capital markets, provided targeted relief to various institutions, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, it provided consumer protection, which I think and I would hope is a bipartisan quest for us. The Senate bill also shorts the Small Business Administration's entrepreneurial development programs, something that's been bipartisan in this House. They short it by more than $10 million compared to what we passed last year. It shorts the SBA's Women's Business Centers by $1 million and their Veterans Outreach by $400,000. Mr. Speaker, those are things we included last year that the Senate has found is not a priority. And the question I would have before this House today is, do we no longer hold those as priorities anymore? And if we pass what is proposed today, we're in fact saying no longer a priority that we focused on veterans or on women's businesses. But if that's not bad enough, the Senate bill is more than $31 million short on the SBA's disaster loans program. Many areas of this country, including my state, including many of the states represented in this room as we speak, are still reeling from last year's disasters. So do Democrats really want to cut this lifeline short? Mr. Speaker, I would hope not. By abandoning the bipartisan House bill, Democrats are underfunding programs for women, for veterans, and disaster victims. Additionally, the Senate bill contains nothing, and I say, Mr. Speaker, nothing for community development financial institutions to assist those with disabilities. Are we standing here today, Mr. Speaker, and saying that those with disabilities are no longer a priority of this House? A yes vote today would confirm that. Mr. Speaker, that's why I'm certainly not supporting this bill. But I know that I've worked with my friend, Mr. Quigley, who's now the chairperson, and we're going to have a great working relationship. But this Senate bill is deficient of even his priorities. And I know it's very difficult for him to today introduce a bill that he didn't craft, that he didn't originate, other than by name only today. And I know it's probably even more difficult that he is introducing a bill that was originally introduced by Republicans in the Senate. But it doesn't include even his priorities that I worked long and hard with him on, including the Elections Assistance Commission, which was a strong priority of his. They cut it by more than $1 million over what we had included last year. The Consumer Protection Safety Commission is also $1 million below what our House bill was. And it does not fund the grants for pool safety, which I think we all know is a long-time House priority for many members of this body. But finally, Mr. Speaker, the National Defense Authorization Act created an entirely new structure for the Treasury Department's Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. They need another $6 million, just $6 million to meet the requirements of this new authorization, which will help protect all of our nation's interests. But I guess I should say it one more time, the Senate has let us down, and they don't even include that in this bill as well. So I lay a lot of the blame on the Senate bill itself and the components of the Senate bill, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that it's being introduced in this House today by the new majority. Mr. Speaker, I heard the presentations that were given on opening day last week as we were all sworn in, and I was hopeful that there would be a very open, deliberative debate process that we would engage in this House. And I know there will be those that will claim there's urgency and there's haste and we must move fast, but we should never move fast and hastily and disregard the constituencies that we each represent nor the voices or putting our fingerprints on legislation in the name of efficiency or in the name of where we are today and the political differences. We must embrace this political debate. We must allow every member's voice to be heard. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'm going to urge my friends on the other side of the aisle, let's give this a chance. Let's open this process up. Let's come to the table. We can do this. In fact, Mr. Quigley and I have shown that that can be done, even as we worked through last year. We can fund border security. We can secure our nation. We can reopen the government. We can incorporate the priorities of Republicans and Democrats in the House today, because after all, we are closest to the people, and don't their voices deserve to be heard? The American people are counting on us, Mr. Speaker, so they've elected us to do this. I hope we can do it. And with that, I rise in opposition. We'll be opposing this bill, and we'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, the distinguished, newly minted, first ever chairwoman of the House Appropriations Committee, Ms. Lowy.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am delighted